Salam, Maz.
Assalamu
Thank you
alaikum.
very much.
Assalamu
Oh,
alaikum.
and Rukshana as well. Thank you both for joining me, I guess, today. So like we just said off air, we actually recorded this podcast like 2, 3 years ago, and we had some technical issues, and so we lost the entirety of the recording, unfortunately. So we're back for round two, trying to do this again. So thank you again, I guess, for agreeing to come back. We've had a few of these kind of technical issues in the last few weeks, and it's frustrating, but we get by. Right, so I guess to kick off with, I think that for context, when I came across your personal story and your father's story specifically, I was quite alarmed at the fact, and this was like going back a few years, but I was quite alarmed at the fact that I hadn't come across it sooner and it wasn't more prominent in the kind of mainstream. And there wasn't talk of this or reference of this as a particular case of anti-Muslim terrorism that had taken place on UK soil. And I think what's again quite alarming is that I only stumbled across it because I was kind of researching and I was trying to prove a point in an article or something that I was putting together. And I saw this, and then I kind of went down the rabbit hole of finding out more, and it was just astonishing that I there was no prominence to this. So I guess I assume that a lot of people listening to this may not have come across yourself or your father's story. So would you be able to very briefly kind of recap what happened and how your family's life changed in 2013?
Yeah, of course. On the 29th of April 2013, it's going to be 8 years this year. My father, Mohammed Saleem, was 82 years old at the time. And he prays at the local masjid, which is Green Lane Masjid, which is at the end of our street. He's done that most of his life, and he prays there 5 times a day. And that particular day, everyone saw Dad going to the masjid, going back and forth, to read all his prayers. On this particular night, he went to read his Isha prayers, and when he left the mosque around about 10 past 10 p.m. on this particular night, actually, Dad wasn't feeling great. Normally, my uncle goes with him to the mosque and comes back. And on that night, my uncle had some relatives. So he basically said, "Oh, I have to go home." My dad's like, "You go. I'll don't worry, I'll walk." Because it's not far. It's just at the end of our road. And on this night, my father was followed home, and on the CCTV, everyone who lives on our street, because not many people on our street have double glazing, they can hear Dad because he's like normally walking in the middle of the road because it's a quiet cul-de-sac area, and he's got his walking stick, and he's normally hitting a Coke can or something on the street. And on this particular night, you can notice on the CCTV, he's walking quite fast, and then he crosses over the road to the school gate, and he was basically followed home by a neo-Nazi called Pavlo Lapshin, who'd only been in the country for 5 days and who got a British sponsorship, who shook the hand, firstly, of the British ambassador in Ukraine, then got a sponsorship in Small Heath, a predominantly Muslim area, and lived on the premises of Dalcam. He followed my father home on this night and stabbed him to death from behind. And then he went on a 3-month bombing campaign and put bombs outside 3 mosques in Warsaw, Wolverhampton, and Tipton. This was one of the biggest acts of terrorism on UK soil. Yet today, as you've already explained, not many people have heard about it. The media have played it down. At the time, of Dad's death, where we were prime suspects. That's how disgusting it was. West Midlands Police, the way they treated our family. They came to our house and they told us, "We're going to tell you this isn't a racist attack." And we said, how can you tell us it's not a racist attack? They looked at every other motive, but hate crime was never a possible motive. And, we were suspects in this case as well. And it was quite disgusting because had they not caught Pablo, they were ready to pin this on one of my family members. And that's how appalling West Midlands Police were the way they treated us, and that we were suspects. You know, in a Muslim household, when you're doing off source, you know, when you're paying your respects, men and women are segregated. They had male family liaison officers with goggly eyes just sitting in there staring at all of us, like looking at us like it was us. And I do understand that a lot of cases, there's quite a high number of cases where certain cases are family related, but in this particular circumstances, they weren't, and we made that clear. And yeah, we had a very challenging time with West Midlands Police. And yeah, we went back. They weren't taking our complaints seriously. And prior to this, 6 months earlier, my brother's gym, who's got a gym on Coventry Road, was receiving threatening letters from the EDL saying, if you don't close your terrorist gym, because predominantly Muslims go there, you just wait what will happen. And a lot of these letters were going out in the area, and we showed those to the police saying, could it be linked? But they didn't take any of it seriously. And then 6 months later, our father was murdered, and this neo-Nazi was a known neo-Nazi in Ukraine. He's from Dnipropetrovsk, which and again he was making open plan bombs there in the forest. So a known neo-Nazi gets a British sponsorship. Where's the counter-terrorism bill? How did we allow these Nazis into the country? And then he went on his bombing campaign in Warsaw, Wolverhampton, Tipton. How did he know his way around the West Midlands? Because I didn't even know where half these masjids were. And then when I started looking into his Facebook pages, he was a big follower of Timothy McVeigh, you know, all the far right neo-Nazis, and you know, there was, you know, he had a file on his folder which was the ethnic cleansing when they did find him. So there was a lot to this case that people don't know about, and a lot of police negligence in this case, which made us all very frustrated because they wouldn't believe us. And you know, when the counter-terrorism came in, they were a lot more respectful in the sense of speaking to us and telling us, keeping us informed. You know, 1 minute they're saying it was a small penknife that killed Dad, but it was a hunter's knife. You know, they tried to play down the severity of the attack. And, you know, and we challenged them every step of the way. And literally they said to us, because Dad's body was in the mortuary, sadly, for months. And because we kept challenging them, we knew they used this as a reason not to release his body, because we were challenging them. And they were like, literally, if you don't drop the complaints, if you don't drop these complaints, then, you know, literally you have to drop these complaints and we'll release the body. So 3 months later, our father was in the mortuary for months. And you know how agonizing that was for my mother and for all of us. We had 7 inquests, and the coroner sat there like playing the role of God. And the first inquest, he was really like, you know, supportive. And then by the time in the middle of the inquest, you know, he went on a 2-week break, like knowing how agonized and, you know, Islamically how wrong this is. Okay, we understand it's in sudden death, in murder cases, you have to have, you know, maybe 3 weeks or 4 weeks, but dragging it on. And this was deliberately done because we were challenged the police. Our complaints were never met. They were never answered. They never got to the chief commissioner's desk at the time. We were told to drop the complaints and they'll release the body. And, you know, alhamdulillah, Dad's body was eventually released in the month of Ramadan. So, you know, for this, you know, it made us feel a little bit relaxed, you know, that, you know, in the holy month of Ramadan. But it was really, really traumatic. And there's a lot to know about our case that, you know, many people don't know. And sadly, today, it's still not even recognized as an act of terrorism in the British media. I've gone back and forth with the BBC to say, why have you not addressed my father's terrorist attack as an act of terrorism? Because Pavlo Lapshin was given 40 years under the terrorism laws. And I've gone back and forth with them, and they're like, well, in comparison to Lee Rigby, who was murdered 3 weeks after my father's death, and Theresa May went out with the Coverup meetings, Moss condemned the attack, but no one did that for us. There was a deafening silence. When we tried to organize protests and to speak about it, the police, you know, were communicating with Green Lane Masjid and telling them to tell the local community not to attend the protest. So they used the masjid to silence the protest. And it was quite disappointing to see that. And it's been a struggle up until this day. That's why I fight and I campaign, because I don't want any other family to go through the pain we went through. And just reliving all what I'm telling you is really, really painful, because what they did to our family and how they treated us. No one should be
I think,
treated
I
like
mean,
that.
so
Okay.
I mean, I appreciate and can imagine that it's very difficult recalling and recollecting kind of everything that happened, because I think when I hear you talking, I think about you know, everyone has lost someone that they love in some sort of circumstance and capacity, and that's always an incredibly difficult time. But to then have the kind of extreme circumstances of it being a murder, and not only that, but also a terrorist attack. And you mentioned that your family were seen as prime suspects in the case, and the police kind of mishandled or mistreated you outright, and you know, made you suspects as opposed to victims. Um, if you
Mm-hmm.
don't mind, just kind of elaborating a little bit more on just the initial, I guess, experience and shock and trauma that you went through. How did you as a family kind of overcome that, and was there kind of community support? Because you also spoke about the community and how they were being advised not to necessarily come out and support you. What was it like on day one? Because also I think, you know, right now, as you mentioned, it's been 8 years since your father was tragically killed. You have the kind of almost the benefit of hindsight, where you can look back and see all the different turns that the case took, and everything that led up to, is it Pavlo was his name, being imprisoned and charged and whatever else. But initially, that must have been a huge jolt, and I guess it's what also triggered your own kind of career, if we can call it that, in social justice and fighting, as you said, you know, so that people don't experience
Yeah,
what your
yeah, of
family did.
course, yeah. So initially, so I was in London at the time, so I was in my flat, and and then I got a phone call for my my third oldest sister, Fawzia, and she said, "Oh, what are you doing? Are you are you sitting down?" I was like, "Why? What's going on?" She said, "Dad's been stabbed," and then I was like, "What?" And she said, "Look, I can't talk to you. I've got to get to the house." And she literally put the phone down. Then, literally minutes later, my older sister, the oldest sister, Shazia, called me and said, "Dad's dead." And I was like, the shock of it at the time for me was like, it was about 11 o'clock at night, and I literally wasn't even dressed. I would just started packing. I had to meet my older sister in Pinner. I was in Whitechapel. My glasses were just covered in tears. I just packed a bag of socks. I didn't know what I was doing. I rushed to Whitechapel station, and I just don't know. Someone was pushing me onto the tube. You know, when you don't know how to get there, and someone's advising you, and you're in tears, and they're like, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And I got to Pinner, and my brother-in-law came out of the car, and he just hugged me, and we drove to Birmingham. And then when we got to Birmingham, we got there late. So at the time, when it happened, we got there in the early hours of morning. So we went straight to the hospital. But my brother was saying, obviously, all the roads were closed, the tent was set up, no one could get access to the area. And it was a big shock in the community, because Dad was very, very looked highly upon in the community, because he did a lot for the community. He helped the young youth who was choosing wrong paths. In that area, there's a lot of drug dealing, a lot of crime. He advised them, this is not the right path. So, he had so many young supporters. We saw this, a testament was on his janaza. There's thousands of young children talking to us about what Dad did for them. So, at the time when it happened, the area was completely shocked. The community was shocked. The local masjid where Dad literally lived, most of his life, everyone was shocked. They had so much respect for him. They could not believe this could happen to an elderly Muslim man. The shock that someone would target someone so old with a walking stick, that in itself, trying to comprehend that, any religion, any faith, to kill an elderly person is just wrong at all levels, no matter what whether it's racist, any reason at all. So yeah, the initial support was beautiful. Obviously our communities got together. They were cooking for us. They were there in the house. Everyone's reading Quran together. Just trying to deal with it. But as it went along, then people, the police were putting misinformation in the community, trying to find out information. Things like the roads should have all been closed because the attacker was still on the loose, because they didn't find Pablo straight away. They found him They found it 3 months, they found it 3 months like later after the bombing campaigns. So he was on the loose. So the area was scared because they knew there was someone in the area putting bombs outside. An elderly Muslim man has been. This was the summer of 2013.
Can I ask a quick question? Sorry.
Yeah.
Because you mentioned earlier as well that it was 3 months before he was caught. So in that 3 month time, and you just spoke about the kind of fear in the community. In that 3 month time, what was going through everyone's heads in Small Heath in Birmingham?
It was a very, I remember that summer was everyone was panicking. They were quite scared because they knew an elderly man had been, a respectable elderly pious man had been murdered. And then suddenly we were hearing a lot of stories, in the area. There was incidences happening. There was far right in cars, and there were outside mosques, and there was threatening behavior. And, people were linking it to this. And then suddenly, there was the bombing campaigns. And, I don't know if you know that when these bombing campaigns happened in the West Midlands, the negligence from the police as well at the time, they didn't go when the first bomb went off, the Nell bomb went off in Warsaw, I think it was. They arrested an 82-year-old elderly worshipper for that. He went to check what this school bag was after it went out because there were nail bombs. The one in Tipton shattered all the windows of the local area. So again, and then the police went there and then they drove off. They didn't really think there was anything going on, and the way they handled the bombings as well was completely negligent as well, and I had when Theresa May finally showed her face and we had this private meeting. It was in the Tipton Masjid with all the imams for the masjid, and they spoke about the negligence and how they didn't failed to investigate it properly at the time, and how they arrested worshippers, thinking they were the perpetrators of the attack. And I just sat there in shock. And it's funny because on the way to this meeting, the counterterrorism police don't really get on with West Midlands police. And they're like, look, you can say anything you want. We don't care. Go for it. So I did. And I said to Theresa May, why is it taking you so many months to come and see us? You've gone out your way for Lee Rigby, but for us, you've taken very long. And, the negligence that we've faced, and these mosques are telling you, the imams are telling you what they went through, and she could not really answer any of the questions either. It's like they pick and choose what they want to, what looks good in the media. When it's a Muslim that is the victim of these acts of terrorism, they never want to put it in the media. They always want us to demonize us and dehumanize us. And I did go for it when I was sat in front of her. But sadly, the community were deeply devastated. They were very, very scared at the time. Remember sitting in the masjid when we were reading, when we were doing, in the 40 days, we were sitting in the masjid, and there was a lot of fear and panic. People hearing stories that they've been spat at. There's cars driving around with the far right terrorizing people in the area. This was a really scary summer for people. So when they did finally catch Pavlo Lachin, which today I will definitely say he was not a lone wolf, as they have pushed it out in the media, because how could someone from Ukraine come to Small Heath on a government sponsorship and know his way, know which masjid to target? So Green Lane Masjid was in the news for preaching terrorism, and then Channel 4 had to apologize, but it's only a small little article in the paper at the time. So there's a reason for him. There was a reason for him targeting the masjid. So the Tipton Masjid, apparently one of the Guantanamo Bay prisoners went to this masjid, and there was a reason because they found a lot of Daily Mail cuttings in his room in Birmingham, because he was living on the premises of Dalcam, which is behind the Small Heath Asda, right? So for him to live on the premises as well, it's quite like I don't know, to live on the premises of a company that. It's all very suspicious, and we've looked into it, and we know definitely we believe he was working with the far right in the UK for him to come. Maybe Dad was an initiation killing for him, and then he went on to do the free mosque bombings. There's a lot more. We have to think with an open box and not go with the police narrative. He was a lone wolf, because how would he know his way around all these masjids? There's a specific reason why he was targeting each place, and if you look into it, maybe with the Guantanamo Bay prisoner, at the Tipton Masjid was a main reason. Green Lane Mosque, because he was was staying by opposite the Gamkul Sharif Masjid, which is, why didn't he target anyone there? You know, so we have to kind of have a really open mind about how these Nazis allowed into the country, first and foremost, without being checked. And he's a no-Nazi. He actually blew up his own house in Ukraine because he was making a chemical bomb. And his neighbors said he blew up the windows, all smashed out. So he has a police record. And he's also a Dynamo Kiev fan, which is a known Nazi football team. And then all this Nazi literature he had as well. So we have to look at these cases a bit more and not just go with what the police say, lone wolf, lone wolf, lone wolf. Believe me, that he was definitely not a lone wolf. You know, someone from this little village in Ukraine comes all the way to small Heath, Birmingham, gets a placement in a predominantly Muslim area to create a race war. You know, how it's just there's definitely more to it.
Yeah, I think it's definitely important to mention here that racially and religiously aggravated hate crimes by police, which were recorded by police in England and Wales, has increased. And the number of offences recorded by police from 2019 to 2020 has increased year on year by 34% in June. And the majority of those religious hate crimes target Muslims. So there clearly is an issue. And a lot of the work that you are doing now, I read somewhere that you actually went to quite a few marches with your dad, anti-racism marches. How, you know, because I think even though you've gone through this tragic experience, your father was a bit of a feminist as well, wasn't he? He really empowered all of you guys to take part in all this stuff. And I think it'd be nice to hear, you know, that journey of how you started, really.
Yeah, when we were younger, you know, Dad was, you know, he came to the UK in 1957. He was very young and very handsome, and he was working at Aston Steelworks when he came here. And then obviously, you know, a lot of our relatives were here in the UK at the same time. And after World War II, when he came here to do the jobs, basically the British didn't want to do. They invited, migrants and immigrants from all across the world to come and work here. And when Dad came here, initially he was faced with a lot of racism, but he didn't let that define him. He spoke about it a little bit, but he didn't let it define him. And he always wanted the best for us. He had, you know, 5 daughters, and he always wanted us education. He kept saying education is key, knowledge is power. You know, he used to make me read the Daily Jung to him just so my Urdu would be more correct. And, you know, because we used to go to masjid after school, and, you know, you do your Quran and you had these classes, and, you know, and he was encouraging us all, you know, definitely you have to study. In our community in Small Heath, sadly at the time, there was a lot of arranged marriages, a lot of forced marriages. He used to, you know, speak to families, you know, where daughters were like, look, we don't want to get married to this person. And he used to try and mediate with parents as well to say, look, you know, give your children the opportunities to study. And, you know, in our community, alhamdulillah, so many of those girls today are graduates, and they're like, it's thanks to your dad that spoke to our parents at the time. So he was extremely empowering as a father for us to study and get the best education as possible. So when he was here, he loved, you know, the Pakistani politics and obviously Kashmir. We went to a lot of Kashmir demos and anti-war protests that were held in Victoria Square. So, you know, in that respect, he always made sure that we understood what was going on in our own homeland, as well as what was going on here in the UK as well.
So can you tell us more about the work that you've done since? I know you worked for Stand Up to Racism. You were responsible and organised a Stand Up to Trump movement in the UK in 2016, which over, I think it was 1 million people attended. Yeah. So can you talk about the work that you've done since then?
So since when Dad was murdered, I was like, you know, all of us were dealing with it differently. You know, my family is extremely pious. You know, a lot of them turned to the Quran. I turned to, obviously I was reading the Quran a lot as well, but I felt like I needed to do something. I couldn't just sit at home and wonder what the hell is going on. How did my father, you know, looking out my window, I can see where Dad's been murdered. Can you imagine? We have to walk past that every day. My mom has to walk past it. She always stands by the masjid because it's just opposite the Morrisons. and stand, like his dad used to sit by the window, so she always stands there, and she grieves literally still today. She has to go through that. So for me to sit home, and I was getting anxiety, and I just was I just felt like, you're lying in your bed thinking, your head's just going to all different places. And I had to just put that and make it myself more productive and do something to help others as well. So I was in town actually, and I saw this young white lad on a megaphone, and he was talking about my dad, going, "Do you know Mohammed Saleem? Do you know what happened to him?" And I was like, "Oh my God, like, who's this person?" So I just literally started following him around, like, "Who are you?" Like, and he went up to his stall, and he was from a Stand Up to Racism, and I basically, that's how I got into it. So I was like, "Look, I want to get active. I want to do this." So at the time, I think in 2013 was when Stand Up to Racism actually launched themselves, and so I kind of started working alongside them, helping them to build their movement, and speaking at schools, speaking at colleges, speaking at universities, helping to build their protests. And that's how I started to get into it. And then from that, I also worked at Stop the War Coalition at their offices full time for about 2.5 years. As an organizer, and organizing and building the Muslim side of it, getting more people on board. Those were obviously my build-up. I was so passionate, and obviously the Palestinian cause is very passionate for all of us, so that as well, to get more into that as well. So, and then obviously my independent campaigning and helping like the family of Maryam Mustafa, who was sadly bullied, who was beaten to death in Nottingham by a group of girls. And I went to Nottingham and tried to help the family. We helped rehouse them to another house because they were still being attacked by these bullies, because they kind of all got off, and they were treated with a lot of institutional failures and the systemic institutional racism within our own systems that don't help refugee families, is so blatant and so out there. And the way this family was treated was appalling at every avenue. They would not let, because the family couldn't speak English very well. They were spoken down to. No one would listen to them. So I, with the help of Louise Regan from the National Education Union, she's from Nottingham, so we helped them get rehoused, and we tried to help them rebuild their lives, and to help with that case as well. So for me, it was all about, I have no agenda. I don't get paid for the work I do. I do it out of love and passion, and I've been doing it up until this long because I feel like there's not enough voices out there. And when Muslim women especially stand a strong stance and try and speak the truth, they're faced with a lot of misogyny within our own communities, and the way people look down on us. They don't get why we're doing it. We need to be making money. If we don't have money in the bank, you're not respectable enough. We do live in such a materialistic type of mentality in all cultures, but specifically, I've been through all of this, and I've faced a lot of challenges still today, but I still persevere on. And this is why I think it's important for my workshops, Education for Peace, to be prominent inside workplaces. I did a one for a huge corporate company recently. Is my first one for Islamophobia Awareness Month, and it was a very white middle class Tory mainly Tory crowd. And as my workshop finished, they had, so I asked for some feedback. So firstly, I was accused of being anti-Semitic because I'm pro-Palestinian, and secondly, anti-LGBTQ because I wrote an article about Maryam Nawazi and her Islamophobic placards at the Pride March. So they took everything out of context, and I've got to realize that if I'm going to build these workshops and be like, I was actually really nice, considering how vocal and how abrupt I can be. I was very nice in this workshop. It's all about peace and equality, and the fact that even doing that, some people can't handle the truth. They don't want to listen to the Muslim side. Do you understand? And working in this corporate first workshop And the feedback was generally 80% of it was good, but I wanted to know what wasn't good. And when they told me, and I was like, so can we provide some evidence of where I've been this and how I've been anti-Semitic? And it's
So it was nothing based on what you delivered on the day. It was more the context of who you
yeah,
are and what
yeah,
you've
yeah,
done.
of my works. Yeah, nothing
So
to do that.
I wanted to, because I do want to continue talking about the work that you're doing today, because I think you've gone on to do some really important and interesting things. But there's one thing I want to kind of understand, because you spoke about how after your father's murder, you kind of channeled your energy and your effort into fixing or addressing, let's say, structural racism and issues that we face within the system. But when you talk about your encounter with Theresa May, how the police dealt with things, I can see there's obviously a lot of passion, but also a lot of anger, I think, from yourself. And I guess that the question that I had is that, has working in this area kind of helped with channeling that anger or addressing it, or do you still kind of feel as angry as you did on day one with how your family was treated, with how the police treated the case and everything else? Like how have you, I guess, learned to overcome the anger that you had from day one?
You can never get over that. Even talking to you about it now, how my mother was treated, how we were spoken down to, how they basically thought we were a family that couldn't speak English. And again, this is where my dad's knowledge comes in, that this is why he wanted his children to study and be educated. Because when stuff like this happens to you, the way authorities can come down on you, thinking you cannot fight back. And we fought back. As soon as they said, oh, this is not racist, and we said, we're going to tell you what it is. And we challenged them from that moment onward. So that, yes, is very raw. And yes, I have kind of channeled my energy into my campaigning work. But when I do discuss it, I do feel that same pain. It never goes away. It's still that sharp pain in my heart to think that, how you can treat human beings in that fashion and speak to people like that, especially when it's such horrific circumstances. So yes, this has helped my campaigning, and yes, I do get angry when I think about the government that we currently have and the way they behave towards Muslims. And we have a prime minister that calls Muslim women bank robbers and letterboxes and perpetuates a very Islamophobic narrative. Still today, we're still fighting for a definition of Islamophobia when we've already, defined anti-Semitism, and we're constantly struggling to fight, for Muslims and to be recognized that we're not all terrorists. We are law-abiding, educated people. But, and this is why I do what I do.
Another thing I kind of want to focus on, because obviously you are very pro-education, and now you've got this project you're working on. You've also been, as you said, you were accused of being sort of racist, even though you do a lot of work for people that are not from the South Asian community. Particularly, I kind of want to hone in on the Shukri Abdi case, and we interviewed you earlier on in the year. It was last year, last year, in regards to her death by drowning, which was ruled as an accident with the coroner, and that you're going to take it to court and see how it goes. Can you explain a little bit about the case and what the developments are on that?
Yeah. So. Sadly, Shukri was a daughter and a sister of the Ummah, and her when I read her about her death, a visible Muslim Somali refugee child found in the water, and the case is closed, tragic accident. Something didn't sit right with me. As soon as the date came out in the paper, the next day I took a National Express and went to Bury. Sister Shabnam Gulsoom, who lives in the Bury area, contacted me and said, Maz, something ain't right about this case. So I went to Bury. I went to see the family with Shabnam. We stayed with them literally for a week to find out what exactly happened. And the mother explained to us the bullying and the fact that what she was facing, and and the constant and the police, the way the police spoke to the family, again, because the mother she understands English very well, but the way the police spoke to her in a very derogatory manner and telling her, look, so the funny thing was they released a statement about Shukri's death before even telling the family that it was a tragic accident. And that's how the extent of how appalling the family was treated. And from the day go, they have the mother has spoken about how the police have spoken to her and how they have behaved towards her in an appalling fashion. So the mother told us that Shukri was being bullied. She told us she'd been to the school and logged, and they didn't log the complaints when the school did this internal investigation. They apparently didn't log the complaint, so they did a whitewash report. The way Greater Manchester Police handled this case was appallingly, and we kind of got a legal team together who worked pro bono for the family, Teek Malik, Ashley Underwood QC, a great legal team. Alhamdulillah, they've worked tirelessly for this case, to hold those authorities to account that didn't keep this child safe within the school gates. The mother came from Somalia, from a war-torn country, for safety, and yet to find her own child found drowned in the water. And and now the family are taking the case further. They are suing the police for institutional racism. And what the coroner delivered as a tragic accident, we knew this was going to be the outcome because they all work together in Manchester. They're all mates kind of thing, So we kind of knew this was going to be the outcome. But obviously, when you fight for justice, it doesn't stop. It's going to continue. We're going to fight till we do get justice. But sadly, with this case, we were all about fighting for justice, and we invited all communities, especially the Somali communities, to work with us and to help with the campaign. Because we're not Somali speakers, and we needed people from the Somali community to help. And as Zamzam, the mother of Shukri, had some support from the Berry Somali community, but in regards to context of helping with the case, there wasn't as much support. And I'm obviously originally my parents are from Pakistan, and I'm British Pakistani. Shabnam Kulsum is British Pashtun, and Abdul Aziz is Jamaican. And when we did approach certain communities, they were very hostile in nature towards us. They didn't like the fact that we weren't Somali. We dealt with a lot of inherent racism within the Black communities for not being from those communities. I've been witch hunted on Twitter, but I've had to take my account down, just because I've been fighting for this child, and the family have witnessed this and they've seen this. When I've called out the MPs in the local area, James Frith, Tamor Tariq, Rashid Shori, for not doing anything for this child, while they were dancing in shopping centres, at the time of the death, and pushing out the narrative, tragic accident. They were all Labour MPs, and they did nothing to help this family. And they turned up on the day of the janazah, and they did their picture moments, get their photo ops. Then the next day they promised the family on the pretext that we are going to come and help you with accommodation to rehouse the family, because the mother wanted to be moved because she lived so closely to the school and it was such bad memory. The next day, all three men turned up to the house, and the family obviously had family there, and they're all grieving. And we'd been to the janazah, and then everyone from the janazah went to the school to have a protest because they were angry as to why this child had died. And then when I got back to the house, and I went into the house, the family said to me, Maz, these three men came to the house and they were saying you're a bad person. And I was like, what? And they said for an hour, they were there for an hour and 20 minutes to talk about housing. And they said they spoke for housing for 10 minutes, and for an hour and 10 minutes, they slandered my name to the family in front of the whole of their relatives, saying she's a bad person because I called them out for not doing anything. And this is how the local MPs treat a woman. So much misogyny, so much hate, and so much rubbish to defame my character. And the family, and still today we speak to Zamzam every single day, just on a call to her now, because we're obviously helping with the case further. And And this is what the injustices you go through as you fight tirelessly, and also from certain people in Birmingham, from some Somali communities who wanted to hijack the campaign from us and told us to F off, and we are going to take this case over now because you're not Somali and this and that. I've been ambushed.
Really? You faced, so for sticking up for...
Yeah, I've been ambushed in Birmingham by a group of Somali women as well. You don't understand. It's been really, really toxic. Really, really toxic. But we are there to fight justice. We're not there. We're all about unity. We're all about working with everyone. But sadly, there are people with their own agendas. There are a lot of narcissistic personalities. There are a lot of people who will say so much lies to defame and cause so much negative rubbish against you. They've slandered my father in the process on Twitter, saying, oh, she's trying to keep her dad's name relevant. None of these will look into your work of what you've been doing from day dot since my father's died. They'll just attack you with unfounded allegations. And the family know, the mother Zamzam knows this. She said to me, look, Maz, you, Shabnam, and Abdulaziz have been here from day one for me. Still, every single day, the MPs didn't rehouse the mother. We did. We rehoused the mother to another area. We did that, but the MPs haven't done anything for her. Yet they will sit back and constantly push the police narrative. Is a tragic accident. Have secret meetings with the police.
I just want to provide a little bit of context because some of the audience might not be familiar with the complexities of the case. So obviously, so Shukri Abdi, she died after entering the River Bury in Lancashire. It was on the 27th of June 2019, and obviously the 5 children can't be named and won't be named for legal reasons. And on the 4th of December, Coroner Joanne Kersley said there was no evidence whatsoever to suggest that Shukri was pushed into the river. On the way to the river, the court had heard, in particular, child 1 had said, if you don't get in the water, I'll kill you. But the coroner said this was not meant with malice. So it's a really, complex case. We'll put a link up on the podcast so that people can read more about it and the interview we did with you. I know you had also said in our original article interview that Broad Oak Sports College has since closed and it essentially rebranded itself as Hazelwood High School. I know, according to you, Maz, you said that the school was supposed to hold a memorial for Shukri. It never happened. I did contact the school at the time of the article, and they didn't give a comment on it. They refused to give me any other additional information when I pressed them on it. So have you had any further interaction with the school itself about the lack of memorial or anything really on that?
No, it's a complete cover-up by the school. They've tried to move away from this particular school. Broad Oak Sports College is a very bad name in the area. This isn't the first incident. There was a teacher in 2013, Caroline Bailey, who was bullied by teachers at this school, and she committed suicide. It's all over in the papers. It's all there. The school has a very, very bad reputation. It's been under the inspection of what's the school board called again? Ofsted. So if you look at the Ofsted reports of the school, they've been under surveillance for a very long time. So with the Shukri Abdi case, they obviously wanted to move away from it. So they renamed it to Hazelwood High School. They changed the uniform. The children aren't allowed to talk about her. If they are, they'll get into trouble. At the beginning, a lot of children were telling us what happened, and their parents came with statements. And when we did the initial protest outside the school, when the school was closed, let me make that clear, the parents came and told us that child 1 had done this to their children, and they'd shown us pictures. But when it came to giving a statement, they all backed off because of the pressure the school put them under by basically saying, if you talk, it's not, so they were put under a lot of pressure not to speak. So a lot of the statements that were given to us initially didn't fall through. They fell through because of the pressures of the school, who didn't want Shukri's name to be spoken about.
Can I ask at this point, because when we're talking about this case, we've also obviously mentioned your father's case, and I'm thinking about kind of the structural side of things that I think, when you talk about campaigning for justice, as you say, a lot of it is beyond, okay, fine, that they might have ruled Shukri's death as an accident, but you and the family believe that there's a lot more to it, and it could be many years before justice is truly kind of had. And I think also in the UK, you look at cases like the Hillsborough tragedy that took place, and for how many years the families of those football fans had to fight to get justice for their loved ones. How I think I'm trying to understand how you're able to kind of persevere and push through when I think when you look historically, we know that the system is flawed. We know that the system will look to cover up the police, and at every level, as you say, MPs will come on the doorstep and will say things, and schools will silence families to make sure that the prevailing narrative, the mainstream narrative, is maintained. How do you find the kind of strength and courage to kind of push through that and really fight for justice when you know that the odds are so stacked against you throughout?
I think if you look at, let me give you an example. There's a young brother called Shabraz. My dad loved him very much. He's a young brother in Birmingham. This young brother, my dad, he used to always take the chair for my dad. My dad had a lot of love and respect for him. He organized a protest for dad. And then a lot of people, thousands were going to turn up. And then the police put pressure on the local mosque, Green Lane Mosque, and said, you've got to basically stop this protest. The mosque discredited this poor young lad, tried to say he's got mental health issues, and whether he has or not, I think personally a lot of us all have mental health issues. We struggle through life every day. They tried to dehumanize this young lad and tried to stop the protest. That's how places, institutions and sadly masjids will go to silence our voices. And for me to see what they did to this young brother really pushes me to carry on. People have defamed my character, they've dragged my name through the mud, they've dragged my father's name through the mud, through the campaigning for Shukri, but I'll still persevere on because I know I'm not doing anything wrong. I know I don't have an agenda. I know I'm doing this through to fight purely for justice, and I've got Allah watching me, and He is my witness and He is my protector. So I will continue to fight on because I have nothing to prove to anyone. All I know is when injustice is done, we cannot sit there in silence. We have to stand up and speak out. Otherwise, you're taking the side of the oppressor. They'll spread lies about you. They'll say the worst things about you. They'll say defame your character, but you have to stay strong. And believe me, it's not been an easy journey. My mom watches me and she's like, what are you doing? Why are you letting these people do this to you? I said, Mom, Allah's planted this path for me. Really, from my career before, 8 years before this, I was working in events. I was completely in another world. It's directed me this way, and I seem to get through every single challenges. And it's been a very lonely journey, bro. It's, a lot of people just do not get, I've even got family members that just don't get my journey. It's a very, very lonely journey, but I persevere on, because for me, I don't want anyone to experience the pain. And sadly, this pain and this struggle is real, and it's going on for many, many families. A lot of cases aren't highlighted, and people don't know about. People don't speak. Many cultures don't speak English. They can't challenge authorities, and we have to be that voice for the voiceless.
I think almost quite tragically, but your experience firsthand of dealing with the case involving your father puts you in a one of the best positions, let's say, to help and support other families who are going through something similar. Because as much as people want to be able to help, like when you see a tragedy in the community, or even like if someone has lost a family member, be it a father or whatever, it's only if when someone else has kind of been through it and experienced the same thing that there's an element of empathy that can kind of come close, if you know what I mean. Like otherwise everyone's just kind of paying lip service, but when you've felt something yourself, you can really kind of lend and be there as a sort of guiding hand, I guess, through the process, especially when it comes to dealing with the injustice and everything else that you specifically dealt with your father's case. So I think finally, just looking forward to the work that you're doing now, and there's an educational website that you're launching, Education for Peace, in remembrance of Muhammad Saleem, your father. What's the aim of that particular platform, and I guess where do you hope the next few years will take you in this work?
Well, the next few years will certainly be still fighting justice for Shukri alongside Shabnam Kulsoom and Abdul Aziz, and helping Zamzam Arab Toure, the mother of Shukri, to try and get back to a normal life. And she's also had another baby since Shukri's death, and trying to normalize a family life for her, because she has a lot of pain, and being that support for her, that will be my number one priority. And secondly, of course, my education for peace workshops are about, right now we know equality and diversity is a big thing in the workplace. So we know after George Floyd's death, Black Lives Matter, the UK, I've never seen the UK this way ever. Suddenly all the roles you see on the job websites, if you are looking out for a job, are all equality and diversity roles. People want to include, be more inclusive in the workplace. So I think my equality and diversity educational peace workshops will be hopefully will be accepted positively. Obviously with the first workshop, it went extremely positively. But then obviously people didn't agree with what I had to say about Islamophobia and the attacks on Muslim women, in particularly today, and the demonization of Muslims in the media. Then they will start trying to nitpick and try and find faults in your character, which completely, it's a struggle that most people that are fighting for justice go through. So for me, it is all about education. It is going to be about my workshops. It is going to be supporting those that need my help, and I'll always be there for them.
Inshallah, that's awesome. Well, thank you very much for being here today and for sharing. Rukshana, any last thoughts from yourself before we end?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say, because we've obviously had lots of conversations about it, haven't we? And just as a side note, that I think the work that you're doing is wonderful, and I think you definitely fought against the rhetoric that women, particularly Muslim women, are weak and we're feeble, which
traditionally submissive, right? According to David Cameron.
And you are definitely one of those people who was not submissive, and all the work that you're doing is great. We'll put all the links up. And just thanks again for being so sort of open and willing to talk about such a raw and personal thing. We appreciate it, and I'm sure the TMV podcast audience do too.
Jazakallah khair, sis.